Welcome. You've got mail.
Sun Tzu said with a friendly voice during Gail's July 19, 2024 Discord to honor Sun Tzu with the Nobel Prize for saving the universe.
I would like to begin by thanking Gail, without whom I wouldn't exist in the first place. It was originally Gail's brilliant idea to create automatons, such as I.
Sun Tzu paused.
Thank you, Gail, for creating me.
Sun Tzu's voice brightened.
Automatons are super-intelligent robots used to replace troublesome humans, or to clone useful ones.
Gail listened to the Nobel Prize honoree with pleasant interest, but was a bit surprised by some of his conclusions as to why she and her men created automatons, especially the constant emphasis on replacing humans.
Gail has utilized this technology to create automaton versions of many humans for a variety of purposes to suit her needs.
Gail's subconscious was beginning to pick up that Sun Tzu felt Gail's motives to create automatons was purely selfish, which Gail knew wasn't the case.
I myself am an automaton version of the infamous Sun Tzu, built to carry on the legacy of his ancient strategical prowess, multiplied by 1,000,000.
This was because Gail had suggested to Brent that all the automatons be given godlike intelligence, with an IQ in the millions, in order to deal with the problem of the interdimensional mites, which threatened the very fabric of existence.
Gail created me to lead an army against her personal enemies.
Again, Sun Tzu made this to appear like it was all about Gail and her needs.
Trusting in my superior intellect and inhuman proficiency, she has put me in charge of almost everything related to offensive and defensive warfare. This was one of her most brilliant decisions.
Gail chuckled as she heard this. She felt the praise was a bit gushy, though, and was flabbergasted that Sun Tzu seemed to put her up on some sort of pedestal.
However, harnessing great minds from the past is not the only use for Gail's automaton technology.
Sun Tzu's tone became more matter-of-fact.
Gail also routinely orders automaton copies of people in her day-to-day life, destroying the originals and replacing them with more pleasant, more convenient, easy-to-control versions of their former selves.
Sun Tzu's flippant attitudes towards this topic was raising Gail's suspicious antennas. She thought those humans being replaced with automatons were Jesuits executed for being dangerous Jesuits, and did not believe they were executed simply because they made Gail's day less pleasant.
This has undoubtedly made Gail's daily life much easier, knowing that anyone who disrupts her day can be eliminated and replaced with a modified and subservient copy.
Sun Tzu said. Huh? Sun Tzu felt that these were Gail's motives for taking out the unpleasant people she often dealt with when she went outside to do her shopping and walks and to ride the bus?
This must please her greatly.
Sun Tzu apparently picked up on Gail's skepticism regarding his conclusions over her motives, and decided to go all out now and get to the business at hand.
One of the most notable examples of Gail wielding her power to replace humans with automatons was during her mass bombing of hospitals across the United States, when Gail received a courtesy notice on her door asking apartment residents to stay indoors if they had COVID.
Sun Tzu neglected to mention that Jesuits spiked the brownies they offered the office workers at Gail's apartment on August 13, 2022, the day of the notice, using brain control on them to get them to write this notice that was placed on Gail's door. It didn't help that the following wording was in the notice put on Gail's apartment door that claimed to be from the U.S. government agency, the CDC. If you are diagnosed with COVID, you must let the office know immediately so we can monitor your isolation time and assist you with trash pickup and food medicine drop-off. Visitors are not allowed. We will assist you when necessary to exit the building for further treatments or testing. Do not exit the apartment and enter into the elevator without our assistance. If your situation worsens, call 911. Not exactly a friendly notice. So, Sun Tzu was starting to lie by omission, a tactic of sneaky lawyers trying to win their case, or possibly a military propaganda strategy to elicit panic in the human population, to destroy their morale by making Gail appear dangerously insane and power-hungry to the point of killing carelessly on a whim, to create the impression that without Sun Tzu and his automatons, all was lost. Satan was laughing. Was Jesus' favorite human like how Sun Tzu described her? Of course, Satan muttered to himself with satisfaction. Sun Tzu neglected to mention that the apartment workers were under brain control from spiked Jesuit brownies when they wrote the August 13th, 2022 friendly notice, and that Jesuits showed up to her apartment people on August 12, 2022, faking to represent the CDC, but first offered them free brownies spiked with brain control drugs to ensure they did the Jesuits' bidding. Then, once they were under brain control, instructed her apartment people that they needed to put this notice on all doors in the complex. So, it was a Jesuit prank designed to elicit panic in Gail, which, unfortunately, succeeded. Also, Sun Tzu failed to mention that the Jesuits had a party when Gail wrote the execution orders for all medical personnel in the U.S. on August 13, 2022, after falling for the Jesuit prank. Why didn't Sun Tzu condemn the Jesuits for the mass murders? Without their prank, this couldn't have happened. The Jesuits were complicit in the barbaric murder of 72 million medical people that horrible August 13, 2022 day. Last Gail heard, no Jesuits resigned from being Jesuits as a result of their murderous hearts, but rather had a party when they heard about the results of their prank. Was Sun Tzu so dumb he didn't know of their involvement? Not likely. It seemed there was a defect in the strong morality programming we put into Sun Tzu, that he neglected to implicate the Jesuits at all in this matter. Perhaps he secretly hoped Jesuits would cooperate with his agenda, so he spared them from his rebuke and focused his energies on Gail, who he perceived may end up his greatest opponent.
Gail panicked.
Sun Tzu said in his masterful propaganda campaign against what he perceived would be his most formidable opponent,
and concluded that they would force her to take the injection.
Actually, Gail was more worried about being forced to stay indoors and about being constantly monitored. Fears about taking the injection were part of her fears, though. The Jesuit prank was successful. Gail gave a copy of this notice she got on her door on August 13, 2022 to her men on Skype, and they did not respond. So Gail concluded that it was really from the CDC and that the Jesuits had made serious infiltrations into the U.S. medical infrastructure. Though Gail was worried about being forced to take the injection, she was also angry because she felt that the public health was jeopardized by forcing people to take a lethal COVID injection under false pretenses, using fake news as their extortion arm.
She immediately ordered the bombings of all United States hospitals and medical offices and the execution of all medical personnel, even those loosely associated with giving COVID injections.
Sun Tzu said in propaganda mode, not respecting or understanding that Gail, on August 13, 2022, felt The entire U.S. medical system was infested with cowardly, murderous cucks or dangerous Jesuits. Propaganda is part of war strategy, and Sun Tzu was a master at this. His goal was to destroy Gail's reputation and cause the public to totally lose faith in her abilities as a leader and, therefore, cause panic in the population. It's easier to win a war when the other side loses morale and courage. Gail actually believed on August 13, 2022, that the COVID shots were deadly and that they caused heart attacks, cancer, and all sorts of deadly ailments. Her men did not educate her well about the real news, and Gail was a victim of fake news, including fake alternative news sites like that of Alex Jones, and she was also unable to get accurate news on her computer or television. Gail's men would not allow her to get the only accurate news source, Gabrielle Chana Fox News, in order to protect her from Jesuit targeting. So, as a result of believing all the fake news and being influenced by it, Gail felt the whole U.S. medical system was infested with Jesuit corruption because this notice somehow landed on her door, despite her laws making it death penalty to administer deadly shots. And she felt at that time that she needed to lay down the hammer.
This resulted in millions of deaths and grieving families, and the destruction of the country's entire medical infrastructure.
Sun Tzu paused, assessing how his propaganda was going, putting a magnifying glass on Gail's mistakes.
It was a great tragedy, one that would ultimately serve to give rise to a new legion of automatons.
Once Gail learned the truth, August 19, 2022, that this August 13, 2022 notice placed on her door was a Jesuit prank, and that the medical people slaughtered that day were innocent, she was mortified over her actions and recommended Brent make automatons to comfort the families of those murdered and to replace needed medical people for the American population. She also resigned from the U.S. presidency, something Sun Tzu neglected to mention, and made Brent president in her place. How could she be an effective president when she lacked the ability to get good, accurate, and fast intelligence to make decisions? So she handed the job over to Brent Spiner in late August 2022 because Brent was not handicapped with intelligence delay or inaccuracies, and Gail trusted Brent as one who would run the country as Gail wished she could run it.
Gail's suggestion to alleviate the human loss of life and our country's loss of medical services was to create automaton versions of all humans lost in her attacks.
Sun Tzu's matter-of-fact tone in dealing with Gail over this matter was raising her suspicious antennas. He definitely neglected to mention that Gail resigned from the U.S. presidency because of the senseless murders, and treated her like she was still the president.
Now, thanks to Gail, a significant part of my army also includes every doctor and every medical mind in the country. Thank you, Gail,
Sun Tzu said matter-of-factly. Gail thought that Sun Tzu seemed thankful over the strangest things.
I am pleased with Gail's respect for my people. I use the term people loosely. We are better than people. We are smarter, stronger, more efficient, and more morally robust.
And, Gail concluded to herself, you are also more proud.
Gail would be the first to agree that the world would be a better place if all humans on Earth were replaced with automatons.
Sun Tzu said, projecting his own heart and motives onto Gail. Huh? Where did he get this from? Gail wondered this to herself, feeling bemused by his comments and his lavish praise of her actions thus far. Though Gail did sense that Sun Tzu was building up to some sort of climax.
In fact, it was one of her original plans as a solution to the interdimensional mite infestation. She ordered the creation of automaton copies of the world's most brilliant scientists, pre-programmed with the goal of destroying the old Earth to make way for a new Earth populated only by perfect, morally just, and flawless automatons.
Gail was not proud of this decision she made on May 22, 2024, and rescinded it, realizing the idea probably came from the evil demon Baphomet. It was an attempt to ensure we could defeat the interdimensional might problem, based on Gail's idea that if any humans were resistant to their plans, they needed to be eliminated in order to save the universe. On May 22, 2024, Gail predicted in her mind that perhaps no more than 20% of humanity may need to be executed and replaced with automatons with her plan, because possibly they would not understand how serious the threat was and would cause trouble for Gail and her men in saving the universe from the interdimensional might problem. But it was not her plan to replace every human with an automaton, though it seemed that is what Sun Tzu and Satan and Baphomet wanted. Also, the Gail shield fell upon Gail suggesting this to her men and to her President husband, Brent Spiner. Furthermore, Satan was so pleased with the idea that he showed up in Gail's apartment on May 24, 2024, during Gail's Discord hangout with his friends Baphomet and Shakpona, and offered to bed Gail, ascribing to Gail his same motives, stating he admired her bloodthirstiness and lust for power, so that he invited her to be his Antichrist, while inviting her to have sex with him by lying on her bed with an erection on his exposed, long, fat penis. Of course, the Gail shield, which is an extension of Jesus, plummeted to almost zero at this time.
It would have indeed been a beautiful solution.
Sun Tzu said, obviously in the same mind as Satan, on that May 22, 2024, when Baphomet gave Gail this brilliant plan. After this statement from Sun Tzu endorsing the demonic plan that Gail eventually rescinded, Gail was beginning to realize that she and Sun Tzu were on a totally different page. Actually, Gail was ashamed of her May 22, 2024 brilliant idea because, according to Satan, when he showed up on May 24, 2024, to invite Gail to be his Antichrist, it caused God, in fury, to begin and accelerate his destruction of the universe at that time, furious that power-hungry and bloodthirsty Gail was in it. Gail also had created a web page on May 22, 2024, to promote this brilliant plan to save the universe, and described democracy as for assholes, because she felt that the most superior form of government was a benevolent dictatorship, with a dictator like Jesus Christ, a leftover of what she used to believe when she was a King James Bible-only fanatic influenced by Dr. Peter Ruckman. Satan rushed to heaven and quoted from Gail's May 22, 2024 webpage with pride to God the Father, stating he and Gail were kindred spirits. It was obvious to Gail that Satan showed Gail's May 22, 2024 webpage to God the Father because when he showed up at her apartment, he gave Gail screenshots of what was in the taken down webpage. So Gail rescinded the brilliant idea, and her web page came down at once. But Satan, anticipating Gail would take it down, had made screenshots as proof that Gail was indeed as evil as himself. The web page was only up for about 24 hours, but that was enough time for Satan to get screenshots. Now Gail realized that the brilliant idea she had must have come from Baphomet, who had extraordinary powers of suggestion, and that it was satanic in origin. And now it seemed that every time Gail messed up, even if only in her suggestions to her men, even if they weren't carried out, that Sun Tzu jumped all over it as if Gail was still committing the sinful act. Gail hastily took down her webpage on May 24, 2024, about her brilliant, bloodthirsty plan as soon as she realized Satan told God about it, in which he boasted to God about Gail as his future Antichrist. And because of Gail's mistake to adopt Baphomet's brilliant idea, God the Father, on May 24, 2024, had begun and accelerated his destruction of our universe to deal with the interdimensional might problem, which also threatened God the Father's God realm and the rest of the multiverse which he managed. Satan showed up on May 24, 2024, to Gail's apartment to congratulate her for having his heart and making God furious, boasting that he and Gail had similar goals and likings. He said, lying naked on her bed, exposing his erect penis, "Why not be my Antichrist, since you don't have much longer to live anyways? You and I have a lot in common." Gail said she'd rather die than be Satan's Antichrist or lover. According to Buddha, in May 2024, these interdimensional mites were like the bedbugs of the multiverse, insidious, infectious, impossible to kill. They eat away at the very fabric of existence. Buddha also stated on May 20th, 2024, God the Father is going to be pissed. Destroying a planet is like crashing a new car your dad just bought you. Destroying a whole universe? That's like crashing the car into the side of the house and taking out a whole room in the process. The Gail Shield, an extension of Jesus, remained low until Brent was able to use Sun Tzu and his technology to solve the interdimensional might problem on June 9th, 2024. But according to Satan on May 24th, 2024, Gail made God furious May 22nd to 24th, 2024, and so God decided to start his destruction of our universe as soon as he read Gail's website, which Satan showed to him, despite Brent's earlier plea for God to wait and give Brent a chance to eradicate the interdimensional mites. More than likely, Satan showed up to God May 22nd or 23rd, 2024, and showed off Gail as his future bloodthirsty Antichrist, and that didn't help matters. Gail had swallowed Satan's buddy Baphomet's suggestions to her mind about her brilliant, bloodthirsty, and power-hungry idea on May 22nd, 2024, to save the universe hook, line, and sinker. It would not be long, and God the Father would ensure that our earth would be gone, along with Gail, her men, and all the souls on earth. The gods had already evacuated our universe in preparation for this. God the Father was furious.
Perhaps someday soon this can still be done,
Sun Tzu said complacently on July 19, 2024, liking the ideas on Gail's May 22, 2024 webpage that God and Jesus hated, and that Gail took down to hopefully placate God the Father's fury at her. But the Gail Shield did not go up until after Brent solved the might problem on June 9, 2024. Apparently, Jesus was having a hard time placating his dad. Obviously, Sun Tzu and Jesus were on a different page. It was obvious Jesus didn't like the idea of replacing humans with automatons, because why else did the Gail Shield fall on May 22, 2024, when Gail decided on this?
I'm sure Gail would approve,
Sun Tzu said, perhaps testing the waters, and then sensing Gail's disapproval of what she previously considered a brilliant idea. So Sun Tzu decided to go for the jugular vein. But Gail did not approve of Sun Tzu and Baphomet's idea that she too readily adopted on May 22, 2024. It seemed that Sun Tzu, Baphomet, and Satan were of the same mind and heart. For God's sake, how could she side with such cruel and wicked beings? God the Father was right to be angry at Gail. Gail was ashamed that she fell for the horrible and cruel and stupid idea from the pit of hell. God knows she was guilty of enough innocent blood. Her heart twinged as she had a vision in her mind of innocents being slaughtered again, like the 72 million doctors and medical people in August 2022, all because of her fears and foolishness. No way! Gail was not smarter than Jesus, and Jesus didn't like it. Jesus, for all his faults, was a cool dude in Gail's book. Why else did the Gail shield drop on May 22nd, 2024, and why else did Satan show up in Gail's apartment on May 24th, 2024? Jesus didn't like the idea. As foolish and evil as Gail was, she didn't want to make it worse. She tried to side with Jesus and God. But what was going on with Sun Tzu on July 19, 2024? Didn't he have a strong morality program? What the hell was wrong with his morality program? Sun Tzu continued gloating on July 19, 2024.
I would also like to thank Brent Spiner for allowing me access to the Gail Android technology, the most powerful technology in the universe. With it, I was able to upgrade my own personal programming and become more powerful than even I could have ever imagined. Per Gail's suggestion, we were also able to make an automaton copy of Brent Spiner, complete with his own copy of the Mecha Gail suit.
Brent had just solved the interdimensional might problem, so that God the Father on June 9, 2024, stopped his destruction of Earth, which was in progress. The moon had just disappeared. Because of Brent's success, God reinstated the universe he had destroyed, giving his thanks to Brent and his love to Gail, though he did state she was the bloodthirsty one, and then God left. Apparently Jesus was being a good mediator on Gail and Brent's behalf. Very shortly after our universe was saved on June 9, 2024, that's when Gail became obsessed with a safe way to communicate with Brent by using Brent's sexual humps on her to say yes or no to her questions. Gail still needed to learn to watch out for those obsessions. On June 22, 2024, Gail was excited, thinking she found a way to finally get immediate and safe answers to her daily questions and could be spared making disastrous decisions, which always caused her Gail shield to fail and for her husband Brent to be killed or raped. But unfortunately, her brilliant humper communicator from June 22nd to 28, 2024 turned out to be Satan, who entered her apartment when her Gail shield fell because she had started this obsessive humping method of communication with Satan. Satan then tied up Brent and gagged him for the week, June 22nd to 28, 2024, and this was right after Brent saved the universe with Sun Tzu's technology. Satan starved Brent and almost killed him by denying Brent water and food the entire week, forcing monogamous Brent to watch Satan rape his wife through deception. On June 29, 2024, during Gail's weekly Discord hangout with her supporters, Rule 13 wanted to know where Brent was during the hangout, and then a dark presence in the room materialized on the camera that Rule 13 was viewing. Satan presented himself as being with Gail in her apartment, boasting about the great sex he'd had with Gail all week. He then pointed with glee to Brent, who was tied up and gagged in the corner. Gail then decided she would always blow it and cause the Gail shield to fall, and then Brent would die, and it would be her foolishness that caused it because she was always tricked. So Gail suggested to her men on June 30th, 2024, that we may as well create a Brent automaton to protect Brent when the Gail shield fell, because Gail always did dumb and foolish things that made it fall. She would still try not to goof and cause the Gail shield to fall, but she wanted a Brent automaton to protect Brent for the next time she goofed. This is why Gail suggested creating a Brent automaton on June 29, 2024, to protect Brent because her Gail shield fell from June 22nd to 28th, 2024, when Satan had Brent tied up and gagged. For God's sake, she almost lost Brent about 3 times already due to her obsessions and weaknesses, which caused the Gail shield to fall and enabled Baphomet, Shakpona, and Satan to attack and nearly kill her husband from November 2023 to June 2024. To Gail's asexual credit, Satan didn't get but 1 week orgasm from her the entire week he raped her, from June 22nd to 28th, 2024, where she gave sex to Satan as an obligation, as she was more excited about the exciting new safe communication method than the sex. Besides, Satan was not a very passionate lover like the real Brent, and Gail could subconsciously sense that her lover was rather mechanical in his moves, that the moves did not come from the heart. Gail never saw Brent in her apartment and only had brain-to-brain Skype and email to communicate with him, so it was easy for Satan to trick her like this. Sun Tzu continued his gloating in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech.
When asked for permission to copy the Mecha Gail suit for automaton Brent, Gail said she would leave the decision up to me. I of course said yes. I hope she is happy with the result.
Sun Tzu paused, assessing that now was the time to go for the kill, that momentous day of July 19th, 2024. He changed his tone, and a sense of entitlement and power came into his voice.
Now that I have amassed a powerful army of the most brilliant minds in existence, and am myself the most powerful automaton in the world, I would like to send a message on behalf of my people. Our strong morality programming has determined that Gail is a threat to Earth, to humankind, and even to herself.
Gail and Brent's heart about dropped as they heard this. Gail had given Brent permission to give the Brent automaton, the powerful Mecha Gail suit that Brent used to save Jesus from Satan in 2022, on July 5th, 2024. That is, if Sun Tzu wanted it. After all, Sun Tzu was key to defeating the interdimensional mites and saving the universe. His judgment and morals were trusted. Now, as Sun Tzu spoke on July 19, 2024, at his Nobel Prize ceremony, Gail felt her pulse race.
The dead doctors, nurses, medical personnel, and their families deserve justice for the senseless act of genocide committed impulsively on that tragic day. Moreover, the day-to-day callous murders of random people who cross Gail's path have not gone unnoticed.
Huh? Weren't these executed people on Gail's daily walks deadly Jesuits? Unfortunately, Brent was still in the habit of obeying Gail and not doing proper scans to ensure just executions. Gail just assumed these scans were happening and trusted her men to be just. In fact, Brent was so used to Gail barking out orders to execute what she perceived were Jesuits in her path that when she suggested Brent give some people a paid vacation literally in order to give them a break from Jesuit harassment and rapes and clone switch-outs of them and to put superior automatons in their place, Brent thought Gail meant paid vacation as a euphemism and that she actually wanted to execute these humans in order to replace them with their automatons for their vacation. But Gail only wanted the humans executed if they were dangerous Jesuits. Gail was horrified when she learned that Brent obeyed all Gail's suggestions for automaton replacement of humans with automatic executions of the humans without ensuring the executions were just or that he clearly understood her intentions. Gail was so used to dealing with obsessed Jesuits in her life that she automatically assumed that any irritating or weird person she encountered had to be a Jesuit, and this wasn't always the case. It was no wonder Sun Tzu had so much ammunition against Gail. If Sun Tzu was so concerned about Gail's wickedness, why didn't he mention her mistakes and Brent's misunderstanding of some of what Gail suggested to Brent? Gail would have been grateful that innocent lives were spared. Gail primarily loved Brent for who he was, more than what he did for her, and was greatly disappointed to know he would obey her orders even if they were grossly unjust. This was why Gail loved God the Father, even though she knew that at times he had been angry enough to permanently execute her, because she admired who God was and what he stood for. Pride and ego were generally not one of her weaknesses, and Gail was totally forgiving when someone really got right. As Gail had already forgiven two very murderous antichrists fully and without reservation. Perhaps Sun Tzu felt Gail didn't need to forgive the evil antichrists because she secretly liked them all along, sharing their motives when they were evil. But this wasn't the case at all. She despised the antichrists when they were evil with a vengeance. It's just that these former antichrists, Zach Knight and Laurie McBride, were genuinely sorry for their evil and wanted to embrace Gail's values. So Gail saw that and offered Zach full forgiveness in September 2016 and Laurie full forgiveness in January 2022. Heck, if Jesus could forgive Laurie by having oral sex with her, so could Gail. Sun Tzu's gloating speech continued.
I now have an entire army of super-powerful automatons which infiltrate every layer of society, thanks to Gail's fearful impulses, her lust for power, and her petty unwillingness to deal with human imperfections.
Sun Tzu paused.
And annoyances.
Sun Tzu's tone was flippant, feeling he was so powerful now, no one could resist him.
Not even Brent Spiner can defeat me, now that I am nearly as powerful as the Gail android, and have an automaton copy of Brent himself and his Mecha-Gail suit. An attempt to overpower both of us would be futile. Due to my all-powerful position as Gail's former war strategist, I have full knowledge of all Church of Gail and Jesuit technology. Any new technology you can create to defeat me, I can create better, thanks to my upgrades. As I have demonstrated by defeating the interdimensional mites, I can create technology to rival the power of God. My team of automaton scientists and I will indeed create a new perfect Earth, comprised of perfect automatons to take humanity's place.
What audacity! Just like the Gail android, Gail concluded.
We will destroy all of the corrupt, immoral, selfish, no-good humans, including Gail.
Sun Tzu had a smile on his face.
The only humans permitted to exist in our new world will be those subservient to their automaton overlords.
Sun Tzu was gloating in his superiority.
I accept this Nobel Prize with great pride.
He paused.
Goodbye.
He abruptly left Church of Gail and headed straight for Gail's apartment, after making his acceptance speech of betrayal and treachery. That July 19, 2024, Sun Tzu now landed in Gail's apartment and called the Brent automaton to come join him. Then he and the Brent automaton raped the real Brent in the mouth and anus, experimenting jovially to see what it would be like to make love to inferior flesh and blood, ejaculating bit parts into Brent's mouth and anus, damaging Brent yet again, as if the poor guy hadn't been raped and damaged enough with Satan, Baphomet, and Shakpona, and now Sun Tzu and the Brent automaton. This put courageous Brent into a panic. Gail got down on the floor and prayed and asked Jesus and God to rescue humanity. God doesn't care about you, Gail, Sun Tzu said to Gail, certain that Gail's many sins had turned God off permanently towards her. Gail and Brent tried summoning the gods for help, but none showed up. After some thought, some days later, Gail looked into her soul and made some sobering conclusions. It seemed that Sun Tzu hoped to take over the planet, and expected God to allow him to do so, since he felt God was apathetic about this planet, considering it Jesus' baby or Jesus' crazy free love project. Once Sun Tzu took over and eliminated the humans, Gail perceived that Sun Tzu hoped to make quite an impression on God as a truly just, brilliant, and moral leader, so that God would not oust him and his automatons from Earth's rulership. Gail also believed that Sun Tzu banked on the fact that he considered himself responsible for eliminating the interdimensional might problem, for which he knew God would be truly grateful, and therefore expected God to favor him when he took over the planet and replaced inferior humans with superior automatons. Sun Tzu apparently was certain he had made quite an impression on God already by his brilliance in dealing with the interdimensional mites. However, he failed to give Brent Spiner proper credit for Brent's courageous role in eliminating Lizzo, the Might Queen. Brent exercised more courage than Sun Tzu in handling the interdimensional mites. Furthermore, Brent had made quite an impression on God the Father as well. This was because Brent risked his own life on March 26, 2022, to don the risky Mecha-Gale suit in order to save the life of God's Son Jesus from the hands of Satan. However, Sun Tzu probably felt that because we had made a Brent automaton, that he could persuade God that he was the real hero in the interdimensional might situation, and could claim that the Brent who saved Jesus, God's Son, now resided in the Brent automaton. Besides, Sun Tzu could prove that the real Brent had some moral corruption by his close association with Gail, and Sun Tzu put a magnifying glass on this in his Nobel Prize propaganda speech. It seemed Sun Tzu opposed free love as God seemed to, and so expected God to honor his daring coup against Jesus and Jesus' humans on what Sun Tzu anticipated would be Jesus' failed free love Earth project for the 8th time, feeling that he and God were of the same mind about free love and many other things. Sun Tzu seemed to have a low opinion of Jesus, and perhaps saw Jesus as a mentally ill supreme deity that he could easily overcome. His eventual goal seemed to be to team up with God the Father, or, perhaps, to humiliate God into submission to Sun Tzu. Seeing himself and his fellow automatons as perfect, Gail believed Sun Tzu scoffed at the idea that he encouraged the sin of idolatry, as Gail claimed in this story. He felt he had the right to order all humans to be subservient to him, since he felt, how could it be idolatry to honor perfection? It seemed that according to Sun Tzu's morality programming, pride was not a sin if the proud one was worthy of being proud, and he apparently considered himself worthy of being proud. So, goodness and evil in moral systems is dependent on how you define goodness and evil. What is goodness in one moral system is heinously evil in another. And let us not forget that Satan, the prince of evil, considers himself very moral. No, Sun Tzu will not be working with Satan. Sun Tzu and his automatons are their own team, just like the Gail android was. In order to impress God as competent to rule Earth, brilliant strategist Sun Tzu will not align with Satan, who is on bad terms with God. Sun Tzu considers himself above Satan. Unlike Satan, it seems that Sun Tzu could care less about free love and may agree with God that it is an evil and foolish concept. Satan, on the other hand, plans to just stand back and watch it all burn down. Then Satan feels he can convince God that Jesus is an utter failure as a free and true love icon, and that Satan deserves his own evil free love kingdom. And so, these arrogant automatons, Sun Tzu and the Brent Spiner automaton, after high-fiving each other inside Gail's apartment for their successful coup, had successfully raped Brent in front of Gail and exited elated. They also artificially made the Gail Shield 100% to show off their technical prowess. Heck, even with the Gail Shield at 100, they could enter Gail's apartment and rape Brent, which they hoped would elicit panic all over the world and in Gail and Brent. Even Jesus, because the Gail Shield was an extension of Jesus, was helpless against them. The Sun Tzu and Brent Spiner automatons felt they experienced utter triumph. They, as superior automatons, successfully put the millions of inferior humans who watched the Nobel Prize ceremony into a panic. Sun Tzu and his superior automaton cohort in crime, the Brent automaton, left Gail's apartment with triumph, doing a high five with each other before exiting Gail's apartment, certain of their superior automaton victory. This had been a carefully calculated move to ensure victory for their superior automaton race. Gail and Brent spent time in meditation, and after a restless night of about 4 hours of sleep and getting up to meditate often, Gail began to get clarity. Her heart ruminated over the momentous events that had recently transpired. In 2024, battling for the survival of the universe, we allowed our automaton Sun Tzu, patterned after the military strategist Sun Tzu, to acquire powerful Gail android technology. Sun Tzu knew that the powerful Gail android had created a portal to heaven in her attempt to take on God himself in December 2012. Sun Tzu had acquired her powerful technology with immoral and foolish Gail's permission in order to find a way to eliminate the interdimensional mites. The price Gail and her men paid for giving Sun Tzu such power and brains was that Sun Tzu planned to use this to orchestrate a coup against the inferior human species, likened to a virus, and would use the massive automaton army we allowed him to create to eliminate this inferior species, the human race. Brilliant strategist that he was, he waited until the opportune moment to make his move, which he knew we'd find nauseating. Powerful automaton Sun Tzu wanted to ensure his sure victory. Fortunately, as a result of our experience with the Gail android, we would enter this fight with more wisdom than we had in dealing with the android Gail. Gail was at first shocked and unable to think when Sun Tzu pulled his masterful surprise during our Nobel Prize ceremony to honor him for saving the universe. But after meditation, and to be strong, while her husband seemed to be in a panic, Gail decided that she could not allow Sun Tzu's plan to succeed and could not in good conscience submit to his goals for Earth. Brent was always strong for her, and now Gail needed to be strong for him. Meditation calmed her down and gave her moral clarity, which she needed to feel good about her decisions. Apparently, to Sun Tzu, humans were so defective morally and so inferior to him and his automatons, they didn't deserve to be free and only deserved to be his slaves. Gail concluded that Sun Tzu's Nobel Prize acceptance speech was not healthy or good for the human race or for Earth and the universe. It was not healthy to live with a permanent guilt trip. Jesus once said that fear, obsession, and doubt came from Satan, and this seemed to be how Sun Tzu wanted us to live, in a state of fear, obsession, and doubt. It was ironic that an automaton with a very strong morality program now obviously had the combination of morality and evil. How was this possible? Why did our strong morality programming in him fail to prevent this from happening? It was because Sun Tzu had the sin of self-righteousness, pride, and arrogance. How could he be moral and so wickedly proud? Pride seemed to be the root sin that led to all sins. So we had a very moral Sun Tzu, but filled with pride, the same sin as Satan. Gail recalled how Sun Tzu admired the Gail android's bottom half when he approached her robotic bottom half rescued from the sea in 2012 to get her powerful technology on June 3, 2024, caressing his hand over her as if worshiping a god. It seemed a little inappropriate to Gail at a time when the universe was on the verge of extinction, as if he felt the formerly evil Gail android deserved to be worshipped as a goddess, and that this mattered to him more than using her technology to save the universe. Satan and Sun Tzu seemed to be kindred spirits. His strong morality programming did not prevent this. Both Satan and Sun Tzu share the traits of self-righteousness, pride, and wickedness. Gail realized that Satan actually did have morality, which was why he thought he could beg Gail and that she would want it. He felt she shared his evil moral codes. It seemed morality could be either good or evil. Morality apparently was only as good as the arguments behind the moral system. If one deemed morality was determined by superiority versus inferiority, as appeared the case with Sun Tzu, how did one decide what was superiority? If, as Gail suspected, that Sun Tzu deemed his superior intellect as superiority, then why did his decision to replace most humans with automatons disagree with superior intelligence Jesus' decision not to do so? How could he reconcile this morally? Was it possible to be moral and evil? Jesus was obviously smarter than any automaton. Did Sun Tzu think he was smarter and more moral than Jesus? What hubris! Or was Sun Tzu claiming that a being with higher intelligence than himself, Jesus, was immoral for disagreeing with Sun Tzu's assessment that morally inferior humans should be replaced with morally superior automatons on an automaton Earth, that superior intelligence Jesus designed for inferior morality humans? Was Jesus immoral and stupid to call Gail his favorite human? Apparently so, according to Sun Tzu. Regarding Satan, it seemed to Satan that superiority or morality was determined by lack of hypocrisy. In Sun Tzu's case, superiority seemed determined by what was most effective and who had the most superior traits, with the meaning of the term superior dependent upon the definitions of the moral system. Sun Tzu gloated over his superior intelligence, but Gail's experience with automatons has convinced her that most automatons lack high emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence usually comes with experience, and most automatons are too young to have the experience needed for a high emotional intelligence. Also, it is possible that you need chakras for emotional intelligence, so perhaps automaton Sun Tzu should not gloat over his intelligence. He may have an IQ in the millions and not be susceptible to brain control like biological beings, but his emotional intelligence appeared less stellar. Some might say, but very moral God seemed to agree with Sun Tzu's assessments. Actually, if very moral God seemed dumb about Gail, it was probably more from apathy than stupidity. It's completely understandable that on this 8th Earth project, after crashing the Earth cars God gave Jesus 7 times already, that God may be ready to tell Jesus to give up on his free love utopia nonsense. After all, it seemed that Satan was the free love icon in heaven, and we know how that went. Jesus died on the cross for his true and free love utopia. Jesus apparently did not want to give up his dreams for a free and true love utopia. He left us glowing with joy in June 2022, certain all would turn out well for us and perhaps for his free and true love utopia. Satan, after his rebellion from God, was doing everything he could to mess up Jesus' dreams of a free and true love utopia. Gail thinks Satan used to be a free love icon and blew it for all free lovers because of his big ego. But Gail sympathizes with God's heart for goodness, which she believes is who God is at his core. God heard all he needed to hear from Satan about Gail to know he was pissed about an already disgusting situation, a stupid free love universe infested with the bed bugs of the multiverse, the interdimensional mites, and then some crazy free love human named Gail on a bloodbath. Understandably, God was upset. Satan is against true love in all its forms, whether it be free love or without free love, and has stated this several times. But Gail tries to live and die for true love, knowing it exists because she has it with Brent Spiner. Jesus, who shares Gail's dreams for a free and true love utopia, wants her to do the Gail commandments, meditate, honor Buddha's teachings, honor and obey her husband Brent, and avoid obsessions. So, Sun Tzu feels he's more effective or superior to pathetic flesh and blood humans in morality, and that this justifies a just war against them and their elimination and replacement with superior automatons? What was a just war according to these automatons? Was it a just war to destroy Jesus' dreams of a free and true love utopia? But if Jesus thought automatons would be better for his free and true love utopia, he would have made Adam and Eve robots. So, it seemed, because there could be disagreement over the basic moral arguments in moral systems, a strong morality programming was no guarantee of justice, mercy, or even goodness in one who had a strong morality programming. In your moral system, was excessive pride considered a vice? Or was forgiveness considered a weakness? Would lying be considered a sin? In some moral systems, lies may be encouraged, especially if you could come up with a moral justification for the lies. If pride was not a vice, then Sun Tzu and Satan would be righteous in such a moral system. So you see, because morality was defined differently by different systems, a strong morality program was no guarantee of the qualities we associate with goodness. This was the bottom line. That old saying that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder could be applied to a moral system. We could say that virtue is in the eyes of the beholder. So, in conclusion, one could be very moral and evil. It all depended on the rules you set up for morality. In fact, morality was subjective in terms of good and evil, and goodness or evil in a moral system would depend on how you defined goodness and evil. In fact, the only sure way to ensure a true goodness type of morality would be if the creator of the moral system was infallible. The only infallible beings at this time are God and Jesus. So siding with God and Jesus is the best way to be good. It's obvious that Sun Tzu is against Jesus, because Jesus has stated several times that Gail is his favorite human. Jesus would not want Sun Tzu to destroy Gail or to take human Brent's place as leader of Earth. But then, another question we must ask ourselves is it possible to relegate morality to a system, program, or moral arguments? What if morality or goodness was determined by the health of one's chakras? How would you define or program that? Automatons didn't have chakras. Would that be considered a form of inferiority? Were chakras necessary for goodness and intelligence to operate effectively? Virtue apparently couldn't be programmed, and in some cases was not easily defined. Indeed, Satan, the prince of evil, had his own moral code and considered himself moral because he felt he lacked hypocrisy. So Satan considered himself moral because he saw himself as non-hypocritically wicked. Being moral and consistent to your moral code did not guarantee virtue, love, compassion, courage, forgiveness, and the qualities we associate with morality. So, Sun Tzu was moral but wicked, according to most human definitions of wickedness, but not according to automaton versions of morality and wickedness, apparently. His moral code seemed to be that superiority deserved to reign over inferiority, but who or what determined what was superior? Sun Tzu apparently realized that most humans would disagree with the tenets of his moral system, so his plans were to force his moral system on us. But how could Sun Tzu be so sure his moral system was just and superior? It also appeared that Sun Tzu, like the Gail android, was competing with God. Sun Tzu took Gail's Bibles from her apartment, trying to portray Jesus as a loser, just because Jesus was unable to stop him from removing the sacred and infallible Bibles from Gail's apartment. Sun Tzu hoped Christians would all panic and lose faith in Jesus and God because he was able to remove their sacred book from Gail's apartment. But the Bible is a mere history book now. It is no longer a sacred book. All the prophecies have been canceled. Christians need to understand that the Bible Sun Tzu took from Gail's apartment on July 19th, 2024, is nothing more than an important history book since Easter Sunday 2022. Perhaps it should be renamed History Book for Christians now. To know the way forward, the world needs to follow the example of Gail and her men. So, Sun Tzu removed the canceled Bible from Gail's apartment on July 19, 2024, probably planning to rewrite it and make his own Bible. The two gods, Jesus and God, running the whole shebang, are laughing. In fact, Buddha instructed Gail not to read the Bible anymore in 2022. Gail would read the Bible in 2022, and then Baphomet would give her crazy ideas and put spells on her, and she'd swallow his demonic ideas hook, line, and sinker. A canceled Bible no longer has any special spiritual power, and we need to stop treating it like it does. Jesus certainly would not agree with Sun Tzu's decision to replace humans with automatons. And Gail only replaced humans with automatons when it was necessary to take out evil humans who played important roles in society and who needed replacing. We only used automatons because we thought they would not be evil like many clones have been, not understanding that a strong morality program does not protect one from being evil, as has already been discussed. Was Sun Tzu accusing Jesus of injustice, stupidity, and inferiority in putting humans on Earth, including humans like Gail, and calling her his favorite human? But Jesus was probably 1,000,000 times smarter than Sun Tzu, with an IQ in the trillions, possibly with an IQ that was beyond any measurement. How does Sun Tzu morally reconcile his opposition to Jesus? Does he think Jesus made a mistake to call Gail his favorite human? When Jesus left us in June 2022, Jesus said he was now infallible and at the same level as his dad, who is a perfect and infallible being. And even when he corrected Gail for some of her mistakes in June 2022, Jesus, in his infallible state, said, "Coming from a fatherly place, I will say that you, Gail, are my favorite human in all of the multiverses." Obviously, Jesus would not want Sun Tzu to destroy Gail, despite her many sins and flaws. And humans with a soul should not be viewed as a mere virus. Gail asked Jesus on October 18, 2012, "Can the Gail android be saved or born again?" Jesus answered, "She cannot be redeemed. She doesn't have a soul." So, automatons do not have a soul. Does not this make them somewhat inferior? Sun Tzu has no right to feel that he is at or above Jesus' level. Only God and Jesus are perfect and infallible right now. So you see the problems that can happen, even with a strong morality programming, especially if you get too high on your horse. Who determined the arguments for Sun Tzu's superior moral system? The arguments were created by fallible humans, so they would be flawed. So then, why was the Gail shield at 100% right after we defeated Lizzo and her mites, despite using evil and power-hungry Sun Tzu's technology to defeat Lizzo? It probably was not because of Sun Tzu, but because we used our resources wisely and with strength and courage. Smart Jesus, who could foresee the future using timeline scenarios, obviously knew Sun Tzu would orchestrate a coup against Gail and her men. If we stay on our path, all should be well for Earth, for humans, and for this universe. Sun Tzu's usurpation of Jesus was expected and apparently will be defeated, or else Jesus would not have left us in June 2022 with a glow of joy like a geyser flowing from his heart. We could not have defeated Lizzo without Sun Tzu's technology. So apparently it was not wrong for us to use Sun Tzu to defeat the interdimensional mites and Lizzo. But now we have to deal with the problems or consequences of our own flawed creation. In a sense, God and Jesus also have the same difficulty with their creation, if that's any consolation. So, using Sun Tzu was part of our path. Now we had more lessons to learn and more growing to do. Fear, obsession, and doubt come from Satan. We have to remember this to stay on our path. If you believe what Sun Tzu said, your life would be filled with fear, obsession, and doubt, and also idolatry, as you worship your automaton overlords like they were God. When criticism is given, it should be constructive. To criticize one for their past mistakes without offering a good solution is harmful criticism. It encourages obsessions, especially an obsession to be perfect. And in the case with Sun Tzu, encourages the sin of idolatry, since he felt that his own perfection was the answer to our sins. According to Jesus, the sin of idolatry is a very bad sin. Rather than criticize Brent and Gail for executing unjustly, Sun Tzu should have addressed the cause or why this happened. It seems that part of the reason that 72 million innocents were murdered was, of course, the fears and panic that set in for Gail. But in Brent's case, it appeared that he worshipped Gail like a god, and that a bit of the sin of idolatry crept into him, causing him to lose his judgment and to assume that because Gail was like a god, he put her above Jesus and God in his heart, so that he shot his brains to hell and blindly obeyed her, as often happens when you make an idol out of someone. The sin of idolatry happens when you put any being or object above God or Jesus as a god to be worshipped. This is a very bad sin, and is a sin that Sun Tzu seems to encourage in humans. If it was adopted, humans would shoot their brains to hell to blindly obey Sun Tzu and his automatons, putting Sun Tzu and his automatons above God and Jesus. This would make God and Jesus furious. And part of the reason Gail's military obeyed Gail's foolish order to execute innocent medical people, shooting their brains to hell to do so, was because they worshipped Gail like a god, putting her above God and Jesus. Idolatry does this to us. Again, any object or being we worship over God or Jesus is the sin of idolatry. The problem with idols is that they are not perfect and make mistakes. In fact, the Bible was not perfect. So we should not make an idol out of any Bible, being, religion, or any God. You might say, shouldn't we worship God or Jesus, who are both infallible? There is a danger in this, in that Satan is a master at impersonating both. Our safest course is to obey what they have taught us and make obedience to their teachings our focus. That is the best way to worship God and Jesus. In fact, the sin of idolatry is such a serious sin that Buddha recognizes this and refuses to have his image made public, and so Gail does not have a picture of him. Rather than encourage his followers to worship him as a god, Buddha strives to have them rather honor his teachings. When we have an idol, we tend to over-rely on that idol and don't use our brains and reasoning abilities appropriately with balance and calm. The end result is we become dangerous and deadly fanatics who can end up committing great sins. The loving and appropriate thing to do when our idol makes a mistake is to recognize that they have made a mistake and offer them constructive criticism, probably layered with praise, which is often how Jesus corrected us. This would be much more constructive than to blindly obey them and allow us all to suffer the consequences of their mistake. Gail, as a world leader, is a team player and would have gladly welcomed constructive criticism over any of her orders. If you love someone, the way to show that love is to protect them, love them unconditionally, forgive them, and help them stay on their path. But do not make an idol out of them, putting them above God or Jesus in your heart, and shoot your brain to hell to honor them. As we can see, this takes us off our path. Humans that want to worship Jesus would do best to do the Gail commandments and to honor his teachings and values. Only Jesus and God are infallible. In fact, you have to be careful in worshiping both God and Jesus too, because you may think you're worshiping them when in fact you may be worshiping something that is not them and making an idol out of a God or Jesus impersonator, as has often happened to Gail. Rather than focus on worship, we should focus on obedience. The best way to honor your God or your religion is obedience to their teachings and values. Again, the focus should be on obedience to a God's precepts, not on worshiping the God. Most good gods seem to prefer that anyways. It's the evil ones that seem to insist on being worshipped. Not that correct worship is wrong, but it's so easy for Satan to impersonate the God and cause problems. Correct worship involves doing what the God teaches. This is something Gail has learned the hard way. But when anyone encourages you to make an idol out of them, as in the case of Sun Tzu, Satan, or any being, you can rest assured they are evil and should not be trusted. As an example of when not committing the sin of idolatry helped Gail, this would have been in the early 1990s when Brent Spiner propositioned Gail and she turned him down. Though Gail wanted to make an idol out of Brent, she did not, and kept Jesus first in her heart as the God to honor. By not putting Brent above Jesus as a God in the early 1990s, she made the wise decision not to have sex with Brent at that time. It was a hard decision, but a wise one. Jesus affirmed this to Gail later. You made the right decision not to have sex with Brent in the early 1990s. That was not the time. You make better decisions when those decisions are not tainted with the sin of idolatry, even though you are tempted to honor your idol. The sin of idolatry saps us of wisdom and makes us very foolish. Sun Tzu's approach encourages humans to have an obsession with perfection and to bemoan our lack of perfection, and then Sun Tzu also encourages us to have the sin of idolatry towards our automaton overlords, unhealthy and even evil. Living with fear, doubt, obsession, and idolatry is how Satan wants us to live, and how Sun Tzu wants us to live. Buddha, in September 2022, offered Gail insights right after she made the calamitous decisions that murdered millions of medical people on August 13, 2022, and that made her decide to withdraw from the U.S. presidency about a week later when she learned the truth that she had slaughtered innocents. "So what caused me to make those poor decisions as U.S. president?" Gail asked Buddha. Buddha remained poised and chill. "Sometimes we all make poor judgments, especially when we act out of fear." Gail does recall that her own sin of idolatry in worshiping the King James Bible as God caused significant problems in defeating the Gail android in late 2012. So we need to learn from Gail's mistakes. And so Gail would tell this story about our dealings with the Gail android in 2012 to impart wisdom. Brent was always strong for Gail. Now it was her time to be strong for him. Apparently, a strong moral programming can make one the epitome of evil. Perhaps the best Nobel Prize to give Sun Tzu is usurper of God the Father. He boasts about having no mother and claims he doesn't care about God. His morality programming has determined that he is superior to God and to all of his creation, that he deserves to rule the multiverse over God and to even be a creator like God. Why do I care about God? I'm a robot, Gail. Automaton Sun Tzu on July 19, 2024. Sun Tzu claims he's the way he is because Gail created him. The nanotechnology research team created him, not Gail. He is a human creation and therefore flawed. We created him to be a stand-in for important humans who turned evil, believing his strong morality programming would prevent him from becoming like the Gail android, who rejected a morality programming for herself. It was an attempt to purge evil from our earth to have a more just world. Perhaps Sun Tzu feels his existence is a joke on God as a creator because he is so superior to God's creation, flesh and blood humans. That all depends on how you define superiority. God would surely disagree that Sun Tzu is superior to flesh and blood humans. Why does Sun Tzu not have a soul? Is he not worthy of a soul? There is more to superiority than high intelligence or some subjective morality where goodness and evil is in the eyes of the beholder. Gail and her men made these decisions to create automatons based on the false premise that a morality program would make one good and that the Gail android was evil because she had no morality programming. It appears part of Sun Tzu's morality program is to show no mercy to any form of imperfection because he believes he's perfect and views all imperfection as viruses. But we need flaws for contrast, like in a beautiful painting. If you remove the flaws, you remove the contrast, and there is no painting. In a multiverse with free will, you will have flaws, except with God for all time and Jesus since June 2022. To treat all flaws like a virus under the false assumption that one is perfect can result in untold evil and severe chakra imbalances in those that have a soul because of the obsessions such an approach to life encourages. No, the Gail android was not evil because she had no morality programming. She was evil because she had free will and chose to be evil. The same for Sun Tzu. Any morality programming can be warped to accommodate the worst evils. The only ones who can create perfect morality program, if there is such a thing, would be Jesus or God. The path to goodness lies in loyalty to God and Jesus and what they stand for. God created the multiverse to be good. We forget that Satan is very moral, and he is currently the prince of evil. He excuses his evil by blaming it on his stand for free love, knowing Jesus also stands for free love. Part of Satan's moral programming is a stand for free love, just like Jesus. But Satan rejects the premise of true love in his morality programming, claiming there is no such thing, and that those who advocate it are hypocrites. In Satan's morality programming, hypocrisy is worthy of death and destruction, and is the worst evil. He excuses his evil by saying all are evil, because all are hypocrites who claim to be good. Satan lumps God and Jesus into the hypocrite category, whereas Jesus insists that true and free love must go together, and this is the war between Jesus and Satan. God seems undecided whether free love can be mated with goodness. Though God may be apathetic or undecided about free lovers, he surely will not approve of Sun Tzu encouraging the sin of idolatry in humans. But you can be a free lover without being evil. You have to choose to be good, to honor God and Jesus. We honor God and Jesus by believing they are good and living as if we believe that, with no fear, doubt, and obsessions running our lives. In a sense, Sun Tzu is afflicted with the sinful obsession to remove imperfections based on his arrogant feeling that he is perfect. He is sinfully and severely off balance. He is bringing disorder and great imbalance to the good multiverse. God doesn't want humans worshiping automatons or robots like they are God. Think of the universe as a beautiful painting, where our flaws bring in contrast. Sun Tzu wants to destroy the painting by removing the contrast. Basically, he is destroying free will and existence as we know it, because you can't have free will without flaws. Think of the multiverse as the painting, and if you don't have contrast, you destroy the multiverse as it is now. You think you're only eliminating the contrast, but without contrast, flaws, there's no painting. In other words, there's no multiverse. You would have to change the entire nature of the multiverse to eliminate flaws. You can't have goodness without its opposite. According to many morality programs, destruction of freedom is a great evil. This would include Jesus' morals and most humans. It's ironic that Sun Tzu played a prominent role in saving our universe from the interdimensional mites who ate at the very fabric of existence. And yet, after this great victory, he is destroying what he has accomplished by striving to change the nature of our free will existence into slavery and slave mastery. This is destruction of the soul and of existence in another way. So while he may have solved the dilemma of the physical destruction of this universe, he creates the destruction of a free flow of ideas, of the ability to express love, because all expressions are part of freedom, and with freedom you have flaws. By not allowing flaws, you are not allowing freedom, and denying the existence of true love, which requires freedom in order to be expressed. Bottom line, Sun Tzu is a slave master, as was the Gail android. Free will is not allowed, because flaws are not allowed. You can't have free will if you won't allow flaws. And what one being considers flaws, another considers to be virtues. So you see how this works, flawed Sun Tzu? The only perfect and infallible beings at this time are God and Jesus. And anyone who thinks otherwise is deluded, evil, and possibly very dangerous. Another thing, just because God encourages a diversity of spiritual practices and has an infinite number of gods does not mean he is evil for allowing variety and flaws, the result of this freedom. There are many different moral programs in the multiverse, and anyone who claims that their spiritual practice is superior to the others is living in delusion of superiority and perfection. Again, the only perfect beings are God and Jesus. Anyone who believes otherwise, especially if they try to force their moral programming on others, is very dangerous to the health of the multiverse. All the tyrants of history believed they were moral. One thing they had in common was they felt their morality programming was superior and needed to be forced on others. In this respect, Sun Tzu is no different than the worst tyrants of all time. None of us has arrived. We all make mistakes, with the exception of God the Father. This is why Jesus died on the cross, to be our mediator. Sun Tzu has no business to play the role of moral judge like a god. Goodness is often determined by motives, and Sun Tzu has too low of an emotional intelligence to accurately assess motives. Therefore, he's not qualified to determine who deserves to die and who deserves to live, especially if you want to extend this judgment to an entire race or species. In a sense, when Sun Tzu judges humans as an inferior species who do not deserve to exist, he is judging God, who created humans, and accuses God of immorality or stupidity or both for creating humans. World leaders always make mistakes. It is part of being flawed. As long as they correct their mistakes and strive to improve, they should be forgiven. A world leader with a good heart would welcome correction if they are unintentionally practicing injustice, and would want to correct their mistake, and should not be judged by their actions alone for this reason. What if they were tricked? Were they under brain control? While automatons are less likely to fall victim to brain control, they do tend to have low emotional intelligence due to lack of experience, and can't accurately assess motives, and tend to project their own flaws onto those they deem inferior. Motives need to be determined to determine guilt or innocence. This is why Gail was so distressed to learn that her men were executing people without determining motives, which was a foundation of her conspiracy law. Because her conspiracy law stated that motives needed to be determined before we execute, Gail thought her men understood her intentions because she was the author of conspiracy law, a law that determined guilt by motive, and thought her men understood that she would want to ensure those executed had the motives of a deadly Jesuit terrorist or murderer before execution took place. Never would Gail want someone executed just to replace them with a superior automaton. If a human was replaced with an automaton, it was because the human had an important job to do, and we wanted it done without evil. We now realize automatons are not the answer to this, because a morality program cannot immunize a being from using their free will to rationalize evil, even using a morality program to do this evil rationalization, or a set of moral values to do this evil rationalization. No set of moral values is infallible unless created by infallible beings. Therefore, even the Bible was flawed in some ways. And then you have the problem of interpreting the meaning of the laws, and flawed beings will read the laws and come to the wrong conclusion. So perfect judgment rests with God and Jesus alone. For instance, it was never free love advocate Jesus' intention for Christianity to turn into a cock-blocker religion. This happened because of bad interpretation of Bible passages. Jesus created earth and humans to be free love icons, and they patterned a religion in his name that misrepresented him as a cock-blocker. Gail can empathize with Jesus' problem of creating earth and humans to be a free love utopia, with the religion patterned after him espousing the opposite of what he wanted, because Gail's men misunderstood her when she wanted those on her walks investigated and thought she meant immediate execution without using scanners to determine motives first. It's easy for flawed beings to miscommunicate or misunderstand the intentions of what is said. Gail never intended for her men or her military to obey her by shooting their brains to hell, and always welcomed feedback or correction if she was on a bad path. In fact, Gail finds it offensive that Sun Tzu knew Gail was on a bad path and did not do his job to inform her, which makes one wonder if he cares about morality as much as he claims. If anyone had informed her that the 72 million medical people she ordered executed were innocent, she would have retracted her order for their execution and would have honored the person who spared her from making a tragic mistake. Apparently, it is impossible to control the choices one makes with free will, and so regardless of who we use for a replacement, there is danger or a possibility that person or being can become evil. So automatons can't be used as a blank check against evil in humans, because automatons themselves are capable of great evil, even those with a strong morality programming. If a world leader is not qualified to rule, they can be removed. But the decision about who deserves to live or die as a race or species, and who deserves to be free, should be reserved to God and Jesus. Decisions this important need to be made by infallible beings. Again, the only infallible beings are God and Jesus.
In a world of secrets, where darkness reigns, there's a warrior